So first of all, apologies. You've already heard from Neil about a little bit about data, and I do have graphs as well. So prepare yourselves, make sure you've got a coffee, a croissant, something to prepare yourselves. So my job title is Strategic Workforce Planning and Insights, and that's across our EMEA region, so Europe, Middle East, India and Africa. I've just gone into that role and I'll explain a bit about my background and how I've ended up there. So Fujitsu, hopefully you've heard of us. We work with world-class customers, lots of them are there, but a lot of the work I've had to do is explaining to students and our candidates around kind of who we work with, that we're an IT products, IT services company. But what really stands out to them is that we do the IT services for KFC. So if ever you need some chicken, then come to Fujitsu, we'll supply the IT behind it. A little bit about me in the context of the case study I'll give you today. So I joined Fujitsu in 2012 as a graduate. But prior to 2012, I had a bit of a diverse background. My wife likes to call me Mr. Ben, although I don't really wear hats. But I started my career working for the BBC in broadcasting, went on to be an air traffic controller. Don't ask me how I made that transition. I certainly didn't use read.co.uk to make that transition. I went back to university and I did some lecturing, and then I went into a little bit of analytics within markets. Before then going into Fujitsu. So a little bit all over the place, and finally I settled down with one company. So I started on the business side, moved more into management, and then was dragged kicking and screaming into recruitment. And in recruitment I did a few bits, mainly around junior talent and junior talent acquisition, and I've now gone into workforce planning. But the example I want to give you is actually what I started working on in 2015, which is the junior talent recruitment, and mostly specific to graduate recruitment. So this is the context, the background. So we had lots of unfilled vacancies. It's the tech sector, digital. There's a real talent skill shortage there. We had lots of reneged offers as well. So we thought we were doing really well. We managed to fill in those vacancies, and they all started leaving to our competitors. On top of that, lack of female candidates, lack of diversity. And when you bring them into Fujitsu, actually they're surrounded by white male hiring managers. Large proportion of withdrawn applications. So by withdrawn applications, what I mean there is they've either withdrawn from a particular application step, or they've started their application, they've completed their details, then they've disappeared, they've left, they haven't even taken that first step. So what's causing that? And then we had big name suppliers, lots of spend, attending lots of careers fairs, but actually the sheer quantity of candidates weren't turning up in the system. There had to be a reason why. So actually what we did was we looked straight at the data. And my predecessor kept the data, but we didn't actually make use of it. So that was the real difference. And so what I wanted to do was find all of this data, improve it, but also start to analyze, are these graduates we're hiring in over the last few years, are they actually performing? I was a graduate in 2012. I kind of knew how I was performing. I could see how my cohort was performing, but were the other people performing as well? We had no real kind of indication of that we were doing the right recruitment. So what did we do? So first of all, we took the data points from all of our graduate assessment centres. We took the Psychometrics since 2012. It's just a coincidence that I went back to the same year that I started at Fujitsu. I wasn't so interested in my results, although I am in the graph you're about to see. It was just purely the strongest data set we had started in 2012, so that's where I started from. We started to compare our grad hires, their performance against the two-year scheme. So during their two-year scheme, they had 4 performance reviews, and they all had different performance ratings that we could analyse. Then we wanted to start to spot any trends. Could we start to see any links between different assessment processes, any links between psychometric scores, for example? And then we looked at the continual learning piece. So we're doing all of this. I stayed on a slide for too long. So what I wanted to do was set up something that was long-lasting. So rather than just doing a snapshot analysis, how do we take that forward? So if we're going to make changes, what changes can we make and look back on those past changes and actually, are we now doing the right thing? So that's what we've tried to do. And finally, I can't claim to be any kind of analytical guru. So actually what we did was we got some third parties in to help us with that statistical analysis. You have to make sure that you've got statistical significance in what you're measuring. So prepare yourself, it's the graph time. And apologies, you can't quite see the bottom there. But along the y-axis, along the side, that's the score of our graduate candidates who were hired in the assessment centre. So you can see there some of them maxed out at about a 63, and this is always the problem with data and the problem with running assessment centres. The maximum score a candidate should have been able to get was 58. That tells you everything about the way we were assessing candidates. Along the bottom, the further you are to the right-hand side, that was how well you performed on average during the graduate scheme. So based on your 4 performance reviews. So you can see our real high performers here maxed out. And if I highlight those 5 particular people who are right on the far end, their performance scores averaged, just on one performance score, only 0.5% of our employees get that score during one performance review. So they were getting it 4 times in a row. So they are our top performers. So what we could see here is, this is assessment centre score against performance rating. Was there a positive trend? Very slightly, there was one. So we could kind of see that the assessment centre works as a format, but the content wasn't. And it told us a couple of things. So the bottom left, there was a square of, well, actually, we've hired some people who are lower than the benchmark we thought we set. We set a benchmark of 40, but lo and behold, there are a whole cluster of them, and typically you see they don't perform all that well. So if we're going to set a benchmark in future, make sure you stick to it. And then we saw the top performers, and actually we could set a benchmark of, if, for instance, we had to really reduce our graduate numbers, how would we do it? Well, actually set a higher benchmark, you get that higher quality, that's how you're going to do it. Then you break down the overall assessment centre score into the individual stages. So you get interview, presentation, group exercise. So interview turns out to be the best particular process within that. But actually, when we spoke to the hiring managers about the process itself, did they enjoy it? They hated it. They hated the interview. They had competency, set questions, there was no flexibility. And when you really dug into it, it turns out they were tweaking the marks based on the conversations they had outside of the competencies. So it was a redundant process. We had to change the interview. Presentation, completely flat, no indication whatsoever, had to change it. Group exercise, very similar, no real indication of teamwork skills. It had to go. And then behind all of this, there were what we called our Fujitsu competencies, the qualities we were looking for. So I've put a few up there. Drive for results, putting a customer first, achieving together. No positive indicators, nothing statistically significant. There was only one. And you can't see the title, but it's emotional resilience. You might have come across this before, but it was the only one that was statistically significant. And then the really interesting thing for me was that square there, our top performers. And you can't quite see it based on the numbers at the bottom, but those top performers, where they kind of have that little piece there in terms of the marking on emotional resilience, it shows that there's a real big gap between those top performers in their emotional resilience compared to the rest of their cohorts. Enough so that it meant that going forward, what we wanted to do with our assessment process was plug this in as the main indicator of how we're going to hire in future. We also added in things like psychometrics. So you can see there is a bit of a positive trend. But again, it's fairly similar. It's not all that indicative. But the interesting thing here was, well, twofold. So logic and verbal tests stood out more than numeracy. We've left in numeracy because we actually now take it as an average score, whereas previously we had the individual scores that helped us. But also you've got those top performers. So again, in that instance of, we typically recruit 90 graduates, we have to reduce it down to 30 because we're taking on more apprentices. How do we do it without necessarily reducing our attraction and how much we do in the marketplace? Well, actually, you up your benchmark. And from here, you should be able to see what benchmark we set for our psychometrics. It was 30, but again, someone sneakily got in there at around about the 21, 22. So again, follow your processes, because what happened? They're not a good performer. So what do we do? What did we take forward? So we kept emotional resilience in there. We kept it as a key factor within our tasks. And actually what we added in after speaking to the business about this was a learning from failure. So at the very front end of our assessment centre, we now fail our candidates. We put them through a task that they cannot complete. Really important. And actually what we start to do is we start to measure how they do in the rest of the day based on that initial failure. Removed all those other competencies. And what we added in instead, what we call the digital qualities. So what we're doing in our future workforce. All of the old competencies were kind of matched to kind of really old examples of customers. It doesn't really go anywhere for us. It's not what we're looking for to change our business. Our business is transforming, so actually what we need is new blood, new skills to come in and change that for us. We look back on all of those high psychometric scores, and the main element it now comes into is in an assessment centre where you've got two candidates tied by a hiring manager. They're not quite sure who to hire. The interviews have both gone well. Well, actually, rather than bias in terms of favouring a male candidate, favouring someone from a particular ethnicity, we go back to the psychometric score and we say if it's over 70, you should hire that person because they are more likely to be a high performer with us, just based on all of the background data we have. We've revamped and replaced all presentation tasks and put in those exercises that keeps candidates under pressure now. And we've kept that interview element, but we've completely made it flexible for hiring managers. So hiring managers can ask any question they like, and they know this in advance. All they have to do is keep it consistent with every single candidate they see. So they come in with their script, their questions, and we've got someone there to help assess with them, but it's completely up to them what they want to ask. They come in with different pieces that they want to kind of do on mathematics, whatever they like. So it gives them complete flexibility to make the best decision, and then you add in an element of diversity. So if you have a white male candidate, they cannot be interviewed just by another white male hiring manager. We have an interview panel in terms of that at least it has to be a female or someone from a different ethnicity. And that in itself has led to some amazing results within diversity I'll lead you to later. So what have we done in terms of creating new assessment methods? So the new assessment centre we implemented in 2016, and this was based on, I'm sure you're all familiar with escape room or escape rooms. I'm really pleased to say that actually I've seen a lot of employers now take this on in terms of what they're doing. But the kind of the way assessment changes and goes forward, I'm going to have to change this next year or ask someone to go and change this for us because it moves that quickly. But it's the whole idea of putting them under pressure, that emotional resilience. We're not locking them in a room. We call it an escape the laptop challenge. So we give them a Fujitsu branded laptop. You have to complete all these tasks, enter codes. We're big on cybersecurity. Try and do all that. And by the way, you're going to fail, but we don't tell you until afterwards. That's the idea. So we allow our assessors, our hiring managers, to observe a number of those digital qualities over the 4 different tasks. So our hiring managers, they wander between different rooms. They get to see everyone. They're not seeing or kind of marking particular people. They see everything in the room. And each code allows them through to the next task. And because of that design, they start to learn from their failure. We talk to them after that first session about what they've learned from that, and actually that they weren't supposed to pass it. So what did they experience within that? And really important to take away, the candidates need to understand why they are taking those different steps, why they're answering those particular questions. It's really important for them to understand that in terms of their experience. So another tool we added in was our situational judgment test. And this is where we took all of that data around incomplete applications. So why was it happening? It was over 50%. And the main reason we found is because we still had screening questions, the dreaded screening questions within Recruitment ATS. So if you still have them, please remove them. Cannot stand them. They do not work. I'll go back. So the very first step now within our graduate recruitment process is this situational judgment test. It's real life scenarios, and the examples are provided by our highest performing graduates, and they're provided by diverse high performing graduates, not just all our white male high performing ones. We've added in emotional resilience as the main factor or competency behind those as well, so they are the tricky situations to put you through. And then the aim of them was that increased quality of application, but also reduce the incomplete applications and improve diversity. There was a real specific marker when we looked in the data around candidates from an ethnicity, a black, Asian or minority ethnicity. They had higher dropouts than any other ethnicity in terms of those screening questions, so it was important we removed them. So this is an example of where you can mix data. So this is me on a daily basis. So this was an image I shared with our graduate hires around about May, June time, so they still had about 3 or 4 months before they were due to join the business as a graduate. And this was kind of a coded picture, so I said, I'm writing you all a letter, you'll soon receive it, I hope you enjoy it, and actually within there's a Costa Coffee voucher for you to kind of go and enjoy. Costa Coffee, one of our customers. Explain a little bit about it, they actually understand the importance of why they're a customer to us. Didn't explain the code on the laptop or on the screen there. That was why. There was a ploy behind it, because that 11-digit code was made up of 7 unique fields. And when it was explained to them, they all had an individual code, individual to them on their letter, which was all hand-signed by me. So it felt very personal to them. It contained information about their university, what course they're studying, what they're on track to get. So instead of feeling like something that's automated, it felt very personal and didn't take all that much amount of time to actually produce. And then we talked them through some more details on it in their pre-joining. So 2 months before they joined us, we had an introduction. They got to learn a bit more about the business. And I stood up and spoke about this. But the key thing was you have to speak to each other to help break that code. And as soon as you mention that, it's like igniting a fire. They suddenly start talking to each other. They think they can win a prize. There's incentives there. And the difficulty we had with reneged offers was that no one wanted to speak to each other because they were kind of thinking, oh, maybe I'll take that job with Microsoft, maybe I'll take that job with such and such. Well, actually, a little bit of intrigue, start to build relationships with your cohort, you're more likely to stay. So off the back of doing this over the last couple of years, we've halved our reneged offers. And that saves us thousands of pounds each year. And the Costa Coffee vouchers are £5 each. That costs a minimum, no cost whatsoever. And they really love this, and so the example I always give is a candidate will go on there and they'll speak to the whole cohort on this private Facebook group, and they'll mention that I'm going to be staying in Bracknell, the wonderful, desirable Bracknell place that it is. Anyone else want a house share with me? Because I love Bracknell, it sounds like a great place to stay. No one responds because no one wants to live in Bracknell. And then the next best place is Reading. So it's a little bit dead, a little bit quiet, but add this in, they start to say, oh, well, I'm in Bracknell, do you think that's actually one of the office codes? Well, that makes up part of the code. And it does make up part of the code. Well, actually, yeah, mine starts with 08 as well. I'm in Bracknell, that must be what links it together. Oh, by the way, would you like to house share? Or do you need someone to live with? It's the icebreaker. It really helps build it all together. And that's just based on the data you have readily available. So I spoke about diversity. I won't talk all of this through. But this is the results of our 2017 hires. So for an IT sector employer, we hired 48% female intake last year, which is pretty unheard of. And that's against our largest ever proportion of IT technical graduates. So I won't lie to you, in previous years we've hired lots of things like project managers, marketing, business management, skills that actually typically you see females apply for, but this was our most technical cohort we've ever had to hire, and we managed to make it as female as we've ever had it before. And I think it's a lot down to the tools and actually the data we've put into the system. Ethnicity has doubled in terms of Black, Asian and minority ethnicity, so now 26% of our cohort. In terms of LGBT, 9%, much better than previous years. Disability has shot through the roof, so nearly a fifth of our cohort are either disabled or they've declared an adjustment within the process. So there are a few things we've done then with our website and increasing awareness. We measure things like Russell Group universities, social mobility. Really proud of 43% are the first in their family to go to university. And then a really key part in terms of the situational judgment test was the 36% of applications incomplete in 2017. Still sounds like quite a lot, but when you compare it to previous years, 54% we had in 2015. So that's a massive amount that actually we don't have to go and spend on sheer attraction, the amount on advertising. And in terms of Black, Asian and minority ethnicity candidates, it's down to 21%, whereas you can see it was as bad as 40% in previous years. So some takeaways and kind of where I suggest you start. So start with the really easy stuff. It can be quite hard to go from zero to machine learning. So actually, I kind of call this more a human learning piece. Take what data you can get your hands on and what you want to see. There might be some stuff there that you have, doesn't mean you can make use of it. So start with what you want to see. Focus on the business challenges you have. You might be asked to kind of do time to offer, time to hire, all those kind of things, but what's actually the real challenge within your business in terms of recruitment? The real challenge for us was right at the beginning, the unfilled vacancies, the diversity. So it's finding the right data to go and help you with that. Think competitive advantage, not just return in investment. So actually what we're doing on the reneged offers piece is how do we make sure we don't lose our offers to our competitors, some of our most talented graduate hires. It wasn't about just purely getting money back or spending less money. It's about how we make sure we're staying ahead of the game. Start to automate regular tasks. So don't go whole hog into it, but actually if you feel like there are pieces in there that you can do in terms of automation, please do it. So the example again of reneged offers, really simple and easy in terms of how it extracts out the data, and you can automate it, not all that time consuming. And the one at the bottom was that you start to mix the data and spot the trends. So 2 sets of data that you wouldn't typically put together, put them together and see if actually there is a trend there and see what you can analyze from it. Use your data to tell a story. So the story we tell to candidates using our data is that actually we want you to be a digital leader. So as a business, we're transforming into a digital space rather than typical IT. And actually we need those graduates to come in and become leaders within our business, help us transform. So each of those assessment steps and stages we do, it tells them that story. It's branded, it's an experience for them. And actually consider how data rich your technology is. So we've used things like Psychometrics, video interviews, that SJT. We haven't gone into the virtual reality space just yet. But if you're going to do it, don't just do it because it's exciting technology for the candidate. Think about what data you can get out of it. Think about what touch points it's looking at within that virtual reality, what decisions your candidates are making based on that technology. Candidates need to understand why they're taking those different steps, answering certain questions. If you tell them that, they understand your business more. And then the phrase I use is flip the fit. So your candidate shouldn't be hired to fit your business. You hear managers talking about, well, I'm not sure they'll fit into my area, or I don't quite fit with this particular manager. Nonsense. Speak to your managers about it. They should feel like the candidates are making the choice to fit with you, not the case of the managers choosing whether or not they fit with your business. So try and flip that. And finally, the kind of next steps, future forecasting. So where do I see this going forward? So as you continuously adapt and analyze the data, you're kind of forced to make changes. So it's the example I gave around the escape room. More employers are doing it now, so we've lost our competitive advantage. So actually we need to change it again, up our game. So actually once you've done something, keep measuring it, see what worked in the past and change it. Maximum automation without using a human element. I'm sure other speakers will talk about this, but the more you use technology, the more you use your data, the less human your process will be. So how do you insert those human touch points? A bit like the reneged offer letter. It was very human because I hand signed them all. It felt very personal to them because of the details within that letter. The winners, to use a very Trump phrase, is all about pipelining and tracking. So right from attraction, taking them all the way in terms of dropouts and actually retaining them in the business. So that's going to be the real powerful data in terms of how do you link keeping someone in the business that you've hired already 5 years on to their recruitment data. And that wonderful thing that no one wants to talk about here, GDPR, that will give us a bit of a challenge within that, but that's the future in terms of pipelining, the whole end-to-end process. And 2 final things that hopefully will be part of your discussions. I'd like you to back a horse and hit the value. So back a horse. Our business really struggles with this in terms of we're deciding our future. We think we're good in AI, cybersecurity, big data, cloud, but actually you need to back one horse. Back it and trust it and take the risk. So if you're going to back a horse within data or technology, what would you choose to back? And then think about the risk, and that's where you hit the value. So it's picking out and throwing in technology can feel a little bit like throwing darts at a dartboard. So whenever I was doing the SJT, I probably was aiming for 16, and you know what, if it went wrong, I probably hit an 8 or a 7 in terms of value it would deliver, but lucky enough I hit the 16. But I've done other things where I thought, I'm aiming for 20, and I've hit the 1. I run a university competition, I thought this is great, they're going to love it. Universities hated it, students hated it, and the business are rubbish as well. So you know what, it's not always going to work, but think about where it is in your whole scheme of things or things you're trying to implement that will work, and actually what happens if it doesn't. Is there still some benefit you can get out of it? Thank you very much.